Just a reminder to mute yourselves as we play the video. All right, we are both muted. I will go ahead and get started. Let me get my cursor up. Okay. Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's GP Strategies webinar. My name is Kayla Roth, Marketing Manager for GP Strategies, and I am happy to be your host for today's event. If you've joined us before, we are very glad to have you back, and if this is your first session with us, well, a big welcome goes out to you. We have a great discussion planned today on virtual coaching, but without further ado, I would like to introduce you to today's presenters, Danella Ezekiel and Margaret Bishop. Danella is a coach, facilitator, and leads the team coaching practice at GP Strategies. She is South African, but lives in the UK and works worldwide. She has coached internal coaches as well as leaders and facilitated and customized the transformational coaching program for over 15 years. Margaret is based in London and is a very experienced executive coach and senior team coach, helping to facilitate many of our transformational coaching programs. Margaret has worked internationally in this field for over 20 years and is also a published author in organization development. So without further ado, Margaret, I'm going to go ahead and turn this over to you.
Thank you, Kayla. Danella and I are delighted to be with you all today, and welcome to everybody who's joined us. Here at GP Strategies, we've acquired over 30 years of experience in executive and team coaching. Our heritage includes a wide range of research and publications, some of which are shown here, such as creating a coaching culture in large, complex organizations. Over the last 5 years, we have been moving increasingly to coaching in the virtual space. What we'll be covering today will be 3 main things. Firstly, an introduction to our approach to transformational coaching and why it's so relevant in today's challenging times. Then we will demonstrate how we train and coach leaders virtually, and we've recreated for you an example of this using Zoom. Finally, we will cover the positive differences of virtual coaching. I'm now going to hand over to Danella.
Thank you. So what makes coaching transformational? Well, it is the methodology we use for executive coaching with senior leaders. It's also a program we facilitate for internal coaches and leaders who are interested in helping their people change their mindset and adapt their behavior for organizational change. And the aim of transformational coaching, one is the intention for the coachee to actively commit to some change, not merely to leave the coaching conversation with a must-do action list. It's also not just to gain insight. Insight on its own is interesting, but it's really not enough. And the insight is the coachees learning what they need to change in themselves. For those of you on this webinar who coach, you will probably have experienced at some point the frustration when, in spite of making clear progress with your coachee, their new insights don't lead to change back at work. And that's not the aim of coaching. Transformational coaching is much more than coachees gaining intellectual understanding. Rather, the coach needs to be competent in helping the individual transform how they think and feel in a way that enables them to behave differently. So our experience shows that the chance of learning and change being transferred back into the workplace is much greater when the coachee experiences with the coach what we might call a real change or shift in the moment. And you'll be able to see this in action in a few minutes. But I first want to hand back to you, Margaret.
Thanks, Danella. So why is transformational coaching so relevant now? We've all been forced to confront the reality of the VUCA world, a world of volatility, uncertainty, complexity and ambiguity by the current pandemic. Leaders are having to face up to being in charge, but not always in control. Transformational coaching skills help leaders to focus on what they can influence and how they and their teams can make a difference. By taking different perspectives, responding to challenges more creatively, and imagining a new future. I'm now going to hand back to Danella.
And, you know, it's really interesting to consider what, when coaching and is virtual, positive as well as some drawbacks. And it doesn't seem like in lockdown now we can go and have a conversation with anyone without talking about virtual working. And to be honest, many years ago, I was violently opposed to anything that wasn't face-to-face. However, there are some real positives. And like everything in life, there are also a few drawbacks. No travel costs or harm to the environment, very positive. And of course, adhering to social distancing. Especially in team coaching, you can have immediate diversity across the globe, time zones permitting. And there's a great opportunity to be creative in virtual. I was coaching a woman just last week who was using her young child's bedroom as a temporary workspace. At one point, she just felt stuck in the coaching session and she couldn't come up with any ideas. And I experimented by asking her to wander about the room and become curious with some of the objects in the bedroom. Something in her right brain clicked into action when she picked up a Lego piece. And with this non-rational intervention, it unlocked a lot more ideas. With virtual coaching also, one can split up the coaching time. What about a short session with the client in the morning? The client experiments in real time with her people, and then one can regroup at the end of the day to debrief and embed the learning. One thing I've found is that I do really have to work hard on observing nonverbals, and I can often see only the coachee's face. And of course, that does limit much of the body language.
Some other advantages of virtual platforms that we've observed, we've really noticed there's an interesting effect on power differentials. People have often say that they feel less intimidated if senior people are not actually physically in the same room. And you can keep it simple. You don't need to use all the technical functionalities just because they're there. But we do find, like most people, breakout rooms are very useful. And you know, it is, as Daniela says, it's a safe place for people to experiment. For example, you know, we recently, Daniela and I, used a simple fishbowl technique where a small subgroup was observed by an outer circle. And we got them to turn off their video cameras so they couldn't be seen, and people then feel much less self-conscious. And of course, with permission, you can record, and that's always really helpful for learning purposes. So I'm now just going to hand back to Daniela.
Rather than talk more about virtual, we're going to show you how it can be done in about 3 minutes' time. Our transformational coaching program has various building blocks, but today we're going to touch on 2 of them, clear and levels of engagement, although all of these building blocks are possible virtually. We've said a little bit about what is transformational coaching and about virtual coaching, but we'd like to give you a taster of how we develop transformational coaching skills as part of the program. Whether virtual or face-to-face, our programs are highly interactive with lots of skills practices for all. One such skills practice is called a practicum, and we'd like to show you how this goes. Even though for this webinar the skills practice is pre-recorded, it is based on an actual transformational coaching program Margaret and I facilitated. For confidentiality reasons, you won't see the actual participants, unfortunately, but we have instead some of our excellent executive coach colleagues representing the participants. Margaret, who is the facilitator in the video clip, will be explaining the practicum process to the group. Before the skills practice, they had already spent time together building trust and confidence.
myself, from David, and from the shadow coaches.
Before we continue to show you how the exercise unfolds, we want to share the coaching framework we use for transformational coaching. Some of you may know the GROW model very well. We use CLEAR, which was developed by Professor Peter Hawkins, who we have been in business with for over 20 years. The coach contracts with the coachee what outcome they'd like from the coaching, and then provides deep listening to help the coachee understand their own issues better. The coachee then makes progress when the coach explores facts and feelings, what has been tried and what might still be tried, as well as some action. And the coachee reviews what they've learned about themselves and the situation during the coaching as the last step. These coaching questions are aimed more at being a catalyst for the coachee to change their mindset rather than just come to a once-off solution. Let's push play again, Kayla, so you can see how the practicum starts. At this point, the practicum might run on for 10 to 15 minutes before we call a timeout. So we're going to fast forward to the first timeout to show you how we reflect on the learning in the virtual space.
So let's press pause and notice Paul's comment about assumptions. We use this model called the 4 levels of engagement when we are working at depth with a coaching client. As you can see, the facts are only the beginning of the story. We also explore patterns of behaviour, emotions, assumptions and values. And it is the assumptions and values that often drive the emotions and behaviour. In this case, it might be that David, acting the part of being the coachee, holds the assumption that unless he does everything, the company will fail, which drives his anxiety and prevents him from sharing the load with some very capable team members. By exploring what are the facts that make him sure this is the case, and indeed whether they are true, he may change his mindset or assumptions and try a different approach. So let's now go back to the practicum to see where the coaching conversation goes next. So one differentiator about transformational coaching is noticing when a coachee is stuck and seeing that stuckness as actually an opportunity for change. One indicator of stuckness is ending up with an either-or dilemma. For example, when David seems to think either he has to do it all himself or the business will spiral out of control. Other indicators could be a reality gap, avoiding difficult conversations or challenges, and recurring patterns of behaviour. When the coachee does have an insight or light bulb moment, you often see the shift physically. We call it the shift in the room. For example, when Irene asked David to say more about his phrase, "depends on me," David stopped, looked at the ceiling and said, "I'll need to think about that one." And that physical shift was also a key breakthrough. So now we have our final video clip to share what happens next.
In the interest of time, unfortunately, we need to leave the coaching practicum there. The action and review part of CLEAR continued, and we trust David will have a positive outcome. He came into the coaching session wanting a strategy to lead his team and left the session learning what he needs to change in his own pattern of doing everything himself. We hope that the recording has given you a flavor of transformational coaching and working virtually. And I want to remind everyone that this is part of a training program in which we train leaders in organizations to coach their people, or we train internal coaches. And I'd like to hand over to Kayla. It's been lovely being with everybody.
Yes, thank you, Margaret and Janella, for this very important discussion. We do have a few minutes left, so as a reminder, if you have a question, please be sure to enter it in the Q&A module at this time. Obviously, our presenters have covered a lot in the last 20 minutes, and there is still a lot of information to discuss. I encourage you to continue the conversation with them beyond today's session. You can see their contact information here is available in the slide deck. I would also like to remind you that the recording and slides from today are going to be available on our webinar recordings page at gpstrategies.com for the next 12 months. So I'll go ahead and jump into some of these questions that have come in. The first one is, in your experience, do leaders that you've trained have enough time in their day to do transformational coaching?
Okay, well, I'll answer that. I think it's very realistic that leaders don't have a lot of time. But we also know that there can just be a very short coaching conversation at the metaphorical water cooler, which we don't have these days with virtual working. So, for example, if an employee comes to a leader and says, I really am confused about this new way of working, instead of the leader providing a solution, if he just or she just says, when have you successfully dealt with such confusion before? That is a coaching question and a transformational coaching question. So it can be very small as well. It doesn't have to be long, but it might be. It might be a whole hour as well if the leader feels it's important.
Yes, and I just add to that in fact, when you saw what you saw in the practicum, all those videos only added up to 9 minutes. And in fact, if you took out the facilitator and the shadow coaches, there's only actually about 5 minutes of conversation between the coach and the coachee. So you can do an awful lot in a very short space of time.
So actually, speaking of time, our next question does address that. Is 30 minutes your recommended time for a coaching session? Additionally, how often would a coach and a coachee get together?
Well, shall I start with that one? I think I'd like to differentiate between an executive coach and a leader as coach. So typically, I mean, we do executive coaching as well. Typically, they would be between 60 and 90 minutes, probably once a month or maybe 6 weeks. And that will be very clear about the boundaries of coaching, and you're coming in from the outside typically. When you're a leader as coach, you're actually wearing several different hats. You might be coaching, you might also have different, more directive styles. You're obviously a line manager as well. So it is different. It can be much more ad hoc. So I wouldn't say there was a perfect amount of time for a coaching session to last. It could be in the moment, in a conversation over coffee, or it could be a whole hour. It just really depends on the context. It's not a kind of either or situation.
Yes, and then the last question that just came in, how would you handle a confrontational situation in this virtual coaching environment?
Okay, well, let me just talk, as Margaret said, first of all, how we train leaders to do that, because it is true that sometimes a leader will get quite thrown with a confrontation when they're coaching somebody. And as part of our training program, we really spend time on the leader, first of all, recognizing this might be a good sign, because when there's a bit of resistance, it means there might be some transformation. It also means that the leader needs to be very present and can work with this in a good way. So anxiety or anger, if channeled in the right way, can actually be quite effective. But it does take some skill, and we certainly give our leaders, when we're training them, that opportunity. And as executive coaches, what I don't know about Margaret, I don't look forward to it necessarily, but I actually think it's a really healthy part of the coaching, and it always seems like we get somewhere if there is a difficult moment. I don't know, Margaret, if you've got anything to add.
Yes, I would add. I mean, absolutely, I agree with all of those things, and I think that we definitely also work with the leaders who are training to be coaches about their own patterns and about their own feelings about confrontation as well, because often it's their anxiety about the confrontation that is actually the issue. So it works at various different levels, but it's definitely something as coaches we don't shy away from, because it's all part of the picture. And if they're being confrontational with us, then they're likely to, it's likely to be a pattern in their working lives that, typically needs to be addressed.
Well, it sounds like this is a conversation we could certainly continue. But in the essence of time, it doesn't look like we have any more questions coming through. So we'll go ahead and start wrapping things up. I do want to say thank you again to today's speakers, and thank you to everyone who attended for your time and attention. We hope that you'll join us for future webinars. Registration is available on our webinar page at gpstrategies.com. I wish everyone a great and productive rest of your day. Thank you.